The budget, it's the #1 story in New Jersey tonight. Good evening, everybody. I'm Steve Highsmith. Governor Steve Whitman is at the State House right now on the floor of the Assembly, preparing to deliver her first budget address. Let's join her now as the legislators are greeting her, and she will shortly begin what is the first of what are to be at least 4 budget addresses. Governor Steve Whitman at the State House in Trenton, New Jersey.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And good evening. 2 months ago, I took office promising a new beginning, a government that is committed to fundamental change, a government that is fiscally responsible, a government that uses common sense, and a governor who keeps her promises. Budgets are more than just numbers. They are the balance sheet of our principles, the ultimate statement of our priorities. This is where government puts its money where its mouth is. Only it's not the government's money. It's your money. That's why I'm here tonight. This is the first time in memory that a governor has delivered a budget message to a joint session of the legislature in the evening, during prime time, when it can be broadcast across the state to families in their homes. Traditionally, this speech is given at 2 p.m. when few of you have the opportunity to listen. What you get are a few sound bites on the evening news and an article in your local paper. I asked to give this speech at this time because you deserve to hear directly how your tax dollars are being spent and why. I would like to thank the legislature for agreeing to this change. This is the beginning of 3.5 months of dialogue, debate, and discussion between my administration, the legislature, and the various interest groups that have traditionally driven the policy agenda in Trenton. And this time, you, as citizens, must be involved too. 50 years ago, the first computer was built. It was a mammoth machine, 100 feet long, 10 feet high, 3 feet deep. Today, the computer world has changed. Computers the size of that PC right there have the same capacity as a supercomputer installed 8 years ago that took up 2 rooms at Princeton's Forrestal Center. Microchips are in, mainframes are out, but not in government. Government in New Jersey is an expensive to run, slow to respond, antiquated mainframe. It fills 2 rooms when it needs to take up a single desk. With this budget, we begin the process of remaking government, of making the machinery of government smaller, smarter, faster, more responsive to you, and less costly. We have no other choice. Taxes in New Jersey, the cost of running the machinery of government, are too high. High taxes drive jobs out of New Jersey and discourage new businesses from coming in. They make it hard for a young family to buy a home and for senior citizens to keep them. They force our children to look for job opportunities far away from their homes. If we were to follow the pattern set by governors and legislatures over the past quarter century, state spending would double over the next 8 years. The state budget would be $32 billion, $4,100 for every man, woman, and child in this state. Income, sales, or business taxes would have to go up $3 billion every 30 months just to keep up. That cannot happen. You cannot afford it. Our children cannot afford it. You elected me to prevent it. I will not let it happen. This budget is going to go down, not up. There is only one way to cut government spending, and that is to cut the amount of tax dollars that we take out of your pocket. The more money you have to spend, the more the economy will grow. You elected me to cut taxes and government spending in order to create jobs and stimulate economic growth. And that's exactly what my tax cut will do. Your legislature, under Senate President Don G. Francesco and Assembly Speaker Chuck Hytaian, launched New Jersey on the road to economic recovery by rolling back the sales tax in 1992 and cutting business taxes last summer. I'm grateful to the legislature for quickly approving the 5% income tax cut and the corporate tax rollback I called for in my inaugural address. The Senate finished the job today by approving the elimination of all income taxes for the 380,000 New Jerseyans earning less than $7,500 a year, mostly senior citizens, students, and people working their way off welfare. Those tax cuts are just the first step. I promised you an income tax cut ranging from 30% for low and middle income families to 20% for high income families by 1997. With this budget, I am asking the legislature to take the second step. I am calling for a second income tax cut effective January 1st, 1995. This tax cut would give more to the low and middle income taxpayer who need the tax relief most. My plan would triple the current income tax cut to 15% for families earning less than $80,000 and for individuals making less than $40,000. The cut would be 7.5% for families earning between $80,000 and $150,000 and individuals earning between $40,000 and $75,000. Those in the highest tax bracket would get a 6% cut. And make no mistake about it, I will call for a third tax cut next year. For democracy to work, those who ask for your votes must keep their promises. I will keep mine. Not everyone will be happy with this budget. You will hear complaints about particular cuts, questions about why I kept my promise to cut taxes. But tax cut or no tax cut, we would have had to cut spending this year. We must cut spending to close the $2 billion structural deficit caused by past over-reliance on one-shot revenues and by a past failure to limit the growth of government spending to the growth in tax revenues. With this budget, we stop spending more money than we take in. With this budget, we reduce our reliance on one-shot revenues by nearly one-half. We are changing the way we fund pensions and health benefits for retirees in a way that will save you more than $600 million this year and more than $3.5 billion over the next 4 years without affecting benefits for a single retired worker. We are not taking a penny out of the pension system. We will continue to pay for health benefits on an annual basis. We also address a fundamental inequity in our retiree benefit system by requiring teachers and state workers to pay the same amount toward their pensions that police and firefighters and non-government workers already pay. I know that property taxes are a concern to you. When I urged the legislature to enact a retroactive tax cut, I promised that we would not play the shell game of cutting one tax by raising another. I kept that promise. This budget provides a net increase of more than $100 million in resources available to local governments, which I urge them to use to hold down property taxes. I am recommending the elimination of desegregation aid and a partial phase-out of density aid to municipalities. I am also proposing a 33% reduction in the transition aid to 265 school districts that was supposed to expire completely this year under the 1990 law. This will enable us to shift $28 million more into the 30 poorest school districts. This is a good faith effort toward complying with a Supreme Court order to close the funding gap between the richest and the poorest school districts. We will write a new school aid law over the next year that defines what a thorough and efficient education should mean for every child, no matter where he or she lives. But you know, and I know, that money and more money alone is not the answer. Accountability is. In a school system that already spends more than any other child, per child than any other state, we have to resort to accountability. We must teach children to read in the early grades so we do not have to spend tens of millions of dollars more on remedial education in high school and colleges. We need to inject competition into our schools by developing alternatives like magnet schools and charter schools and voucher systems. And we need to understand that salaries and benefits for school personnel are growing so rapidly that they eat up any increase in state aid long before the dollars reach the classrooms. School districts, like municipalities and counties, must find ways to cut costs. If I can find a way to balance my budget while cutting taxes by $589 million, your schools, counties, and municipalities can find ways to balance their budgets without raising taxes. In fact, I challenge those who are putting so much energy into criticizing my spending cuts to use that energy to find the cost savings in their own budgets that we all know are there. It is not impossible. I said I would cut spending in the governor's office by 20%, and I did it. Union Township, which I visited last month, spends 15% less than the statewide average to educate its children. That's because it pays teachers extra to handle administrative duties that other districts pay vice principals higher salaries to perform. We all know that municipalities and schools can save money by regionalizing services. My treasurer is willing to provide efficiency audit teams to help your local governments identify cost savings. But the best way to find savings is to do what we are doing. Set up broad-based citizens groups within your own towns and school districts to come up with creative ideas that save money, that challenge the old way of doing things. Participatory democracy works. This budget proves it. Before my administration even took office, a Citizens Budget Committee, co-chaired by Candy Strait and Andrew Chapman, identified hundreds of millions of dollars in potential budget savings. Valuable ideas came in from you through town meetings, call-in shows, and tens of thousands of letters that were sent to the Our Tax Dollars program. Nicholas Gordon of Fort Lee, who was with us tonight, wrote to ask why the state is spending so much for a basic skills assessment test for college freshmen that duplicates the test we give to 11th graders. Nicholas, you're right. That test is gone, and you just saved the state $1.2 million a year. Nancy Burwell of Belleville, who was also in the gallery, called 101.5 while I was on the air to suggest that we bring in a company to audit the state government's phone bills. Good idea, Nancy. We expect to save $1.5 million, maybe more by that. Paul Parecka Jr. of Millville, who was also here, asked why the state of New Jersey was running marinas in competition with private enterprise. Good question, Paul. We're going to privatize those marinas in Leonardo and Forked River. Expected sale price, $7 million. We thank you. Nobody wrote in to suggest that we can save more money by continuing the Our Tax Dollars program, but I figured that one out for myself. Write me with your ideas. The address is Our Tax Dollar, CN 096, Trenton, New Jersey, 08625. One of the most intriguing letters to Our Tax Dollars came in December from Frank P. Merlo, a graduate professor of education at Montclair State College. Professor Merlo can't be with us tonight because he's teaching a school finance course. But listen to what he wrote. The present autonomy of the state's public higher education institutions makes the Department of Higher Education somewhat obsolete and relegates it to a make-work function to justify its existence. Professor Merlo, you're right. As of July 1st, the State Department of Higher Education will no longer exist. I am proposing the creation of a council of college presidents to replace the needlessly duplicative oversight now provided by the Chancellor's Office and the Board of Higher Education. Taxpayers will save millions of dollars by cutting this excessive bureaucracy, but more important, we will put responsibility and accountability for our colleges where it belongs, with the individual college presidents and their boards of trustees. In 1986, state college autonomy, the 1986 State College Autonomy Law gave colleges responsibility for greater self-governance and for developing their own unique missions. They have succeeded admirably. Rutgers, NJIT, UMDNJ are stronger than ever. Montclair is about to become the first state college to earn university status. Trenton State is no longer one of the best-kept secrets in higher education. Community colleges are thriving. Our commitment to higher education is stronger than ever. In fact, tuition increases will be limited to 3.5% this year, the lowest increase in at least 10 years. And that's because we recognize that education is the cornerstone of our future. We must provide quality education from preschool to graduate school if New Jersey is to compete in the 21st century. The Department of Higher Education isn't the only cabinet agency that should be eliminated. The Department of the Public Advocate has outlived its usefulness. We will We will continue to meet fully this state's constitutional responsibility to provide legal counsel to the poor and to patients involuntarily committed to mental hospitals. We can do so by transferring the Office of the Public Defender and all mental health screening services to the Department of State. Federally funded programs for the legal protection of persons with disabilities will be privatized and will continue stronger than ever. But the Division of Rate Counsel will be abolished because it duplicates the role of the Board of Regulatory Commissioners. And we will no longer use your tax dollars to finance lawsuits by one government agency against another government agency. Which then has to use more tax dollars to defend itself in a court system also financed by you. We can find better ways to spend our money. It also is time to get government out of businesses it should not be running and give private companies and nonprofits the opportunity to compete to provide services at lower costs. Speaking of better ways to spend our money, public television cannot be truly independent as long as it is funded by government dollars. With this budget, we begin a 2-year transition toward making New Jersey Network financially and politically independent, like its sister stations in New York and Philadelphia. Government control of the media went out with Pravda. I am cutting state aid to New Jersey Network by $2 million to start the transition from tax dollar to private contributions. I will lend my personal support to New Jersey Network's fundraising drive. Privatization makes sense in other areas too. In addition to the 2 marinas, I plan to turn over 6 state daycare centers to nonprofit agencies. I plan to close 7 of the state's 39 armories. The Russians are not coming, except perhaps as tourists. Perhaps the most exciting privatization initiative is a plan to establish a community-based drug treatment facility adjacent to the Hudson County Jail for 400 medium-security state prisoners. 2/3 of the 25,000 inmates in our state prison system have drug or alcohol problems, yet the Department of Corrections has just 250 substance abuse treatment slots. If we keep releasing prisoners with drug or alcohol problems, we know they'll go right back to crime. This new medium security facility, coupled with an expansion of available beds in halfway houses, will give us the opportunity to send prisoners with drug and alcohol problems to treatment programs before they come up for parole. The message will be clear. If you don't get clean and sober, you have no chance for parole. It's as simple as that. This is just one example of how government needs to get smart about spending a few dollars more now to avoid spending a fistful of dollars later. Corrections spending has quadrupled since 1980. Yet we have been doing very little to prevent youngsters from entering the criminal justice system in the first place, and even less to prevent inmates from going back to a life of crime after they are paroled. My Attorney General and Human Services Commissioner are heading an advisory council on juvenile justice that will develop boot camps and other alternatives to put first-time offenders back on the right track. I also want to require inmates to get their high school equivalency diploma or improve their reading by 3 grade levels as a condition for their parole. You can't get a very good job with a 7th grade reading level, which is the average in our prisons. Those who already have high school diplomas can tutor those who need help. We must get smarter about funding health care, too. We will save money by moving our Medicaid population to managed care. But more important, we can give our poorest families the opportunity to take their children to doctors for regular checkups instead of having to wait for their children to get sick enough to go to a hospital emergency room. Similarly, advocates for the mentally ill and the developmentally disabled have been pushing for years to expand community-based services rather than continue to pour hundreds of millions of tax dollars into expensive, outmoded institutions. It is time to consider closing some institutions and putting more money into the community to establish a continuum of care. Throughout this budget, I have tried to invest money now in programs that will pay dividends in the future. Money that will multiply and create opportunities in the private and nonprofit sector. That's why I increased advertising for tourism by $1 million, knowing that every dollar spent promoting our second largest industry generates $70 new for New Jersey businesses. That's why I put an extra $500,000 into promoting our agricultural industry. That's why I'm devoting $250,000 to empower the business ombudsman to cut through red tape and prove that New Jersey is a business-friendly state. That's why I doubled the State Planning Commission's budget to $1.4 million. And that's why I refused to cut our billion-dollar capital spending program, including the $565 million we will spend on transportation programs. And oh yes, there's a $30 million set aside this year to fix all those winter potholes, including $10 million for counties and municipalities. I am proud of the work we've done in putting together a forward-looking budget in just 2 months. I want to particularly thank my treasurer, Brian Clymer, my cabinet, and their staffs. In many ways, this is a transition budget, one put together to close the structural deficit we inherited with the least possible pain. We did limit the pain. School and municipal aid levels remain virtually unchanged. Homestead rebates are preserved. State worker layoffs caused by program cuts are projected at 600, and the final number could be less. But just as important, we are starting the process of bringing sanity to government spending here in the State House, and hopefully in your county courthouses, your town halls, and in your schools. Yes, we will have to make tough choices about spending priorities, but that's what a budget is. You make those choices every month when you pay your mortgage or your rent, buy food, and pay your utility bills first. Then you see if you have enough money to go on vacation or out to the movies. I'm talking about common sense, a sense all too uncommon in government. You don't spend more money than you're taking in. Government shouldn't either. I'm going to keep asking you for your ideas on what you want your government to do. My cabinet members will be reaching out to all New Jerseyans to ask fundamental questions about the programs and services they provide. Together, working with the legislature, we can turn this expensive to run, slow to respond, antiquated mainframe of a government into a smaller, smarter, faster, more responsive, and less costly modern machine. That's how I want us to remake government. Together, in public, in open debate with everyone at the table. That's what democracy is. That's how government should work. We're going to prove it here in New Jersey. Thank you for listening. Thank you for participating. God bless you, and good night.
And so, 2 months after taking office, Governor Christie Whitman doing what she says is bringing sanity to government spending. Main points: a second income tax cut effective January 1st of next year, tripling from the 5% that was enacted a couple of weeks ago to 15% for the middle class, and then a couple of other rates, 7.5% for those a little higher, 6% for those in the highest income brackets. And she says next year when she comes before the legislature, she will ask them for another tax cut, although she has not yet specified how much. She has said that she's going to do all this in part by changing the way pension and health benefits are funded, eliminating desegregation aid, and she insists that there is no extra property tax burden as a result of this. She's going to abolish a few departments or agencies or personnel, the Department of Higher Education, for example, the Department of Public Advocate. She's going to close the state's 39 armories. She will give more money to the agriculture industry. She plans to sell a couple of marinas in Monmouth and Ocean County. She says the homestead rebate program will be maintained. And as we have mentioned to you over the last couple of days, it is expected that some 1,800 positions in state government will be eliminated, most of that through attrition. But the estimate now is that about 600 people will be laid off in the coming fiscal year. Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Highsmith, and welcome to NJN's continuing coverage of Governor Christie Whitman's budget address. Her first, as we said, she took office 8 weeks ago on this date. It happened to be January 18th. It was a Tuesday. Joining us now to discuss what we've heard this evening and what it means for the taxpayers, for state workers, and others are Democrat Cherry Hill Mayor Susan Bass Levin. Thanks for being with us, Mayor.
My pleasure.
And political consultant, Republican Roger Bodman. Roger, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Steve.
Mayor, no business as usual is what the governor said when she took office. Sounds like a no business as usual budget to me. Sounds a little different.
Sounds a little different. On the surface, she's saying there won't be any cuts in aid to municipalities or school districts, unless, of course, you happen to live in Bergen County, in which case you will see a cut in aid to municipalities, or unless, of course, you happen to live in a transition aid school district like mine, Cherry Hill, in which case there will be a cut in aid to schools. So I don't think it's quite accurate to say there aren't any cuts in aid to schools or municipalities, but it's certainly much better than we expected.
But folks out there in large degree, obviously those at least who voted for Christie Whitman, say things just haven't been going right. Government's too big, taxes are too high, therefore cut taxes, make government be slim. So what's wrong with the governor saying, look, we're going to do it on the state level and we're going to put pressure on local governments and school districts to find ways to cut costs? What's wrong with that?
Oh, there's nothing wrong with it. I applaud her efforts on that end, and frankly, I applaud the efforts of the legislature that for years has put a cap on municipal spending. We have a 3% cap and a cap on school spending, a cap that did not exist in state government at all. So schools and municipalities live with, and rightly so, a cap on their spending. So I think to that end, I give her all the credit in the world, but I think that she misses the boat when she says, towns, counties, schools, you haven't done enough. I think you have to look at towns, at each separate town, and look at what they've done. We've done a lot in our town to cut back.
You think she's just mistaken or being disingenuous here?
I'm not sure, and I don't want to characterize it because I think that she's trying hard, and I think that she's made some good first steps here in making sure that there isn't too much pain.
Roger Bodman, on the one hand, if you hearken back a decade, this sounds like it could be the Whitman form of Reaganomics. You say to the federal government, too big, can't do these certain things anymore, states, you figure out about it. Now it sounds like Christie Whitman is saying, state can't do all this anymore, local governments, municipalities, school districts, you figure out how you're going to make this up. What's wrong with that argument?
I think the bottom line is that she's keeping faith with the voters, Steve, and I think that's exactly what she was elected to do, and that's why they were...
To do what I just said?
To provide efficient and less expensive government and, frankly, lower taxes. When you think about the tax burden that's been placed on New Jersey and nationally over the last 4 years, we've doubled the income tax, raised the federal income tax, the sales tax, tax on gasoline, tax on telephone calls, tax on liquor, on cigarettes, and so forth.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though, but when the state income tax was enacted in the mid-'70s, wasn't it to lower the property tax?
It was to provide funding for schools, primarily.
To
as
hold
you
down
know.
Property tax.
Well, no. Again, it was to provide funding for schools.
But that all came from property taxes.
The state Supreme Court of that era decided that, as you say, property taxes were an inequitable way to fund schools, and that the income tax was to provide that. And it still does. Billions upon billions of dollars to do that. There is nothing in this speech that suggests that aid is going to be cut, much to the chagrin of certain Democrats, I think, that wanted, very frankly, or expected a draconian cut in either municipal aid or in aid to education. It didn't happen. In fact, court costs, as the mayor well knows, $164 million worth of court costs at the county level is being borne by the state this year as part and parcel of this budget, which frankly was put forth through the previous administration and the Republican legislature. I think Senator Gormley sponsored that legislation, if I recall. But anyway, the point is that I think it's a budget that keeps faith with the voters. I mean, if you look at the electoral results in New Jersey, and the mayor obviously stands for election, she's well aware, I think, of what the attitude is of the voting public at large. You've seen the legislature go heavily Republican. You've seen tax cuts in the form of the sales tax some years ago, and now you're seeing this governor move forward on the income taxes per her election promises. I think that's right.
What's going to happen to Cherry Hill if this budget passes as it's now proposed tonight?
Well, I think the property taxes that go towards the schools will go up because Cherry Hill will face a cut in aid because there is a cut in transition aid, at least according to what the governor said tonight. In terms of the municipal piece...
Well, why can't you get rid of, and obviously I'm not dealing with human beings here, I'm dealing with positions because I don't want to see anybody lose their job, but what if the public's right and there are too many supervisors, too many superintendents, too many principals or vice principals, and that there are other jobs, maybe even in some cases, too many teachers?
I'm not disagreeing with that, frankly. I don't run the schools, obviously, in my town, and if I did run the schools, I might make some different decisions about the levels of administrative staffing that are needed. But I was just answering your question. If there's a cut in aid with no change in the way things are, then taxes go up. The governor has said several times, I'm not going to do anything in cutting the income taxes that will affect property taxes.
Well, are you going to have to lay off police or fire department personnel?
Well, in the municipal aid portion, she's keeping us whole. So we won't see any increase in money.
But that's not necessarily adjusted for inflation.
That is correct.
So if your costs go up as a result of inflation, the dollars from last year are in reality going to be fewer dollars.
Well, I'm prepared to live with that. I don't have any problem with that. There may be other mayors that disagree with me, but I happen to believe that we do have an obligation to keep our costs in check. And yes,
Mayor,
a budget's about tough choices.
But that's exactly what the governor was asking you to do, and you're being responsible in so responding. I mean, the fact is that that times are tough, Steve. She was elected on a mandate, and obviously the Republican legislature agrees with her to cut government, make it more efficient, and frankly to reduce costs and reduce taxes. She is doing that, and I think that she's simply saying that, you know, obviously with regard to school systems, which are the primary, as you say, beneficiary of the property tax, as well as the great bulk of state aid that goes out there, that she's asking for those local entities, be it a school district, be it a town, or be it a county, to become more efficient as possible.
Are we seeing in any degree the imprint of Christy Whitman as the first woman to be governor on this budget anywhere, or are we not seeing that? Have you noticed that anywhere?
I don't think I see it any place here.
I don't think you can put a gender bias on this budget.
It's not
I think
bias, it's just a question.
Well, it's not a bias. I don't mean it in a negative sense of the word, but in any way that this is a female budget versus a male budget, I don't think it's...
Well, we haven't seen in the details yet anything more for issues that are long thought to be of concern to women and not properly addressed by others. For example, more for certain types of medical research or other kinds of programming for rape crisis or anything like that. We haven't seen any of that yet. Is that your understanding? You don't know if that's in here?
Well, that's true. I mean, I think there are many details missing from this budget, which in some ways makes it hard to really judge the impact.
I don't think there's so much missing from the budget. They're missing from the speech, and I think it is in fact a different speech than past budget speeches, which tend to be much more dominant about numbers and facts and figures, and this department gets this and that that program gets that. This was more of a speech of general philosophy, and obviously the budget document itself will fill in the blanks, and it's a document this thick.
We'll obviously get back to our discussion here in a moment. We want to go back to the State House now and to the Assembly Gallery, and joining us is Bernard Kenny, who is, of course, one of the leading Democrats who is very much concerned about what's been going on, and he was speaking in the last couple of weeks, of course, about the tax cuts and why they, according to the Democrats, may not have been a good idea to have come first, and I believe we're getting him ready, and we'll be joining him very shortly. To pick up on what we were talking about, so do you expect to see any kind of major shift, Roger, by Senator DeFrancesco or by Speaker Chuck Hytien to tweak any of these things in a certain way?
I think there'll clearly be some tweaks, if you will, in the form of the legislature. But I think that, that generally speaking, the Senate President and the Speaker would endorse this budget. The past three budgets, we lost our AAA bond rating, which we had for 16 years under Democrat and Republican governors alike, primarily because of the reliance on one-shot revenues from selling turnpike roads and all sorts of frankly, fiscal gimmicks. She has reduced that substantially, almost in half. I mean, it's a budget that I believe, and Treasurer Brian Clymer deserves a lot of credit, as she credited him with. It's a truth in budgeting document, and it's trying to get off this reliance on over expenditure and on monies we don't have and one-shot revenues. That's bad practice. It hurts us financially in the long haul, and this budget is much more responsible, and I think the Senate President and the Speaker would agree.
Mayor, I mean, every budget has politics in it. And where do you see as the politics of this budget?
Well, I just have to say on the gimmicks piece, this has gimmicks. It has one-shot revenues. The fact is, taxpayers
Half
don't
of last year,
mind.
Mayor.
Taxpayers don't mind gimmicks, but they're here. And what
For
it
example?
does is it puts it off till later.
For
And
example?
I'm actually not saying there's anything wrong with it, but I'm saying don't attack somebody else for having a gimmick. So we have half. Next year there'll be double.
Mayor, I used the word over-reliance, and the AAA bond rating was something that we coveted in the state that, as you know as a mayor, reduces our cost of borrowing. And when that rating goes down, it costs more to borrow money, which we have, in fact, to do in this state.
But this may be an over-reliance. We don't know the answer to that.
It's half of last year.
Okay, I teased us all a little bit earlier with Bernard Kenny standing by, and he's joining us now from the gallery at the Assembly. Mr. Kenny, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. How are you tonight?
Doing well, sir. If I say the word you, I'm going to be referencing you as representative of Democrats, so don't take it personally. But hasn't the governor sort of put a rattlesnake in your britches tonight? I mean, you're going to be doing one heck of a dance when it comes to trying to get around this whole issue of tax cuts and the impact on the budget.
Well, I think what we have to do is what is right by the people of the state. The governor invited us to engage in debate and dialogue and discussion, and that's what we're going to do over the next 2 or 3 months. There are a lot of unanswered questions in this presentation here tonight.
Well, what concerns you most? If you could ask one or two questions of her, what would they be?
Well, for one thing, property taxes are going to go through the roof in the state of New Jersey over the last 3 years because we're not only reducing the funding levels of property tax relief in the municipalities and the schools, we're also connecting them to pension funds, one-time gimmicks, and non-recurring revenue. So I think the property taxes are going to go up very significantly.
Well, if I'm sitting at home and I'm hearing the governor say property taxes aren't going to go up, and then I hear you say they are going to go up through the roof.
The proof will be in the pudding over the next 2 or 3 years. You can count on it. They're going to go up, and they're going to go up because of this budget. There's no question about it.
Now, how can you make that connection? Why can't the local people take responsibility and take the lead from the governor and say, we're just going to hold the line and say no to people?
As a rule, the mayors of this state, the 500 and so many municipalities, as a rule, they run pretty tight ships. The state of New Jersey has a responsibility to fund local government through the income tax that is dedicated under our Constitution. By taking that revenue away, you're going to see skyrocketing property taxes that are going to match what we had in the 1980s. And it's going to happen, and there's no question about it, and that's why the governor's trying to avoid the blame, but the blame's going to fall on her over the next 2 years.
The governor says she's, if I may create a new metaphor, trying to create a fuel-efficient sports car, if you will, a sleek operation in government. I take it you think this is a clunker, or what? Well,
let's be honest about it. The governor is relying on one-time revenues here in the neighborhood of $1.2 billion. She said that she wasn't going to do that, and we're at $1.2 billion already, and that's just based on a quick analysis that our staff has done today. So there's a very significant structural deficit that's going to go into next year, and that structural deficit is going to wreak havoc on property taxes in this state.
All right,
and
but
that's what's going to happen.
That's just sort of business as usual there, is it not? I mean, after all, the Florio administration did that.
Absolutely. We're doing significant one-shot revenues of over $1 billion, and we're also relying on a change in the pension system and a change in the health benefits formulas that are very, very speculative, and there's got to be a lot of water to row in the next 2 or 3 months before we get to that point.
Well, Senator, she's promised to fix the potholes, but do you see legal potholes in that pension and health fund plan, the repaying of everything, changing the way it goes about?
There's going to be a lot of struggle here over the pension issue, and that's a fight I'm sure that's going to be fought by other people. But we as Democrats are primarily concerned about property taxes, the delivery of state services, and making sure the people of the state get their money's worth from state government. We see this budget is going in the wrong direction.
Are there too many people employed in state government right now for what the state of New Jersey ought to be doing?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Are there too many state employees on the payroll right now? Is state government too large?
Well, I think the governor's plan calls for 600 people being laid off. Based on her rhetoric pre-election in November, that's a pretty small number. So we don't see her revamping state government in any way at all. This is really a business as usual as far as state government is concerned.
Who do you think benefits from this budget, and who do you think gets hurt most?
Well, I think the main winners are the wealthy taxpayers that weren't affected by the initial income tax cut, and those who don't rely on state services, and those who do not care too much about what their property taxes are, where their property taxes vis-a-vis their regular income are not a big percentage. Those are the winners. The losers are property taxpayers and those people who rely on government services, and also the state of New Jersey as to its economy. We don't see any stimulation in this budget at all, and we think that we're going to have a flat economy over the next few years as well.
Well, the governor, obviously, when she proposed her 5% tax cut, says, hey, this is just a down payment. There was a lot of outcry by your party about how this benefits the wealthy more than the middle class. Now she's coming out and saying, hey, as of January 1, that 5% turns into 15%, so for the middle class and less for the wealthy. Doesn't that answer your concern?
Well, we're glad that she's responding to our criticism on that point, but we're still waiting to hear how this income tax cut in the future is going to relate to property taxes, because income taxes fund property tax relief.
Can you know that answer before you have to vote on the budget?
We have to, there's so many questions here regarding the $1.2 billion of fiscal gimmicks, regarding property taxes, regarding a number of the other things that were discussed here tonight. There's so many questions that we have a lot of work to do over the next few weeks in order to prepare for committee hearings and in order to prepare for an ultimate vote on this budget.
Senator Kenney, thanks for being with us. Appreciate you taking the time this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Senator Bernard Kenney.